But here's a curiosity, and that is that the parsha that we read on Shabbat this week, and therefore also during the course of the week, is Parshat Vayelech, which is a parsha that contains within it some pretty hard stuff. And it's stuff that really, I think, runs counter to the themes of Rosh Hashanah. For those of us that spend the days in synagogue, right? It's a lot of there's a lot of God talk in there for those in the traditional liturgy category, maybe not for everybody. There's a lot of sense of divine immanence, that God is present, that God is listening, all of that, and a lot of hope that for divine mercy. And that stands in sharp contrast to the following. Hold on. Okay. Oh, sorry. Are you all seeing that funkiness? Hold on. I don't know what I just did. Okay. There we go. We're back. Okay. So here is here's some tough stuff from Parshat Vayelech. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Hincha shochev im avotecha. Right. So again, we are winding down, or Moses is winding down his life. He's about to die, right? And God says to Moses, you are about to lie with your fathers, with your ancestors. V'kam ha'am hazeh v'zana acharei Elokei nechar haaretz asher hu v'ashama b'kirbo. Ve'azavani v'heferet briti asher karati ito. Behold, you're about to lay with your ancestors, and this nation will rise up and stray after the deities. Vizana in Hebrew means more than stray. It means a zona is a prostitute. So vizana acharei Elohei nechar is like your children of Israel will kind of prostitute themselves for other deities of the nations of the land into which they are coming, and they will forsake me. Ve'azavani, they will forsake me and violate my covenant which I made with them. Right, so this is God saying to Moses, you're about to die, and your children are really about to mess up, because their fate, it seems, is to turn their backs on God. V'chara apivo vayom hahu ve'azavtim. And I will get mad. Sorry, here's the official translation. And my fury will rage against them on that day. And I, says God, I will abandon them and hide my face from them. Let's go back to the Hebrew. V'chara api bayom hahu ve'azavtim v'histarti panai mehem. V'haya le'echol. And they will be consumed. They will be eaten, literally. They will be consumed. Umitzauhu ra'ot rabot v'tzarot. And bad things will find them. V'amar bayom hahu halo al ki ein Elohai b'kirbi mitzauni haraot ha'eleh. And the people will say on that day, is it not because our God is no longer among us that these evils have befallen us? To which God responds, V'anochi haster astir panai bayom hahu. Al kol hara asher asa kifana el Elohim acherim, really. And I will hide my face on that day. Anochi haster astir. There's a double language there. Anochi haster astir. I will hide my face on that day because of all the evil they have committed when they turned to other deities. And now the last line. Ve'ata kitvu lachem et hashira hazot. V'lamda et bnei Yisrael sima b'fihem lema'an tiyeh li hashira hazot la'ed b'bnei Yisrael. And now write for yourselves this song and teach it to the children of Israel. Place it into their mouths in order that this song will be for me as a witness for the children of Israel. Okay, so first thing of note is from that last verse. Perhaps you were taken by surprise when the word song was used. It might be translated as poem. Shira is the Hebrew word, which means both song and poem. Either way, there is something that has some kind of, let's say, aesthetic flourish or beauty, perhaps, or musicality to presumably this paragraph, right? The Shira Hazot, this song or this poem, seemingly refers to these words that we have just read, these words about the fate of Israel to follow after other gods, to prostitute themselves before other gods, and to alienate God, to question, and to fall prey, to become the victims of others, right? Seemingly to be punished, and to wonder where God is. And this kind of affirmation, reaffirmation, and indeed I will hide my face, says God, from these people who have gone so very far astray. This is the song that ought to be sung. And this is the song that ought to be as bear witness. The Hebrew is Hashira Hazot Le'ed b'bnei Israel. It should be a witness amongst the children of Israel, or for the children of Israel. It should kind of stand as a kind of testimony. And so my question, and the question of a lot of people before me, is in what sense is this a song? In what sense is it a testimony? And I have a question in terms of the rhythm of the Jewish calendar, which is kind of, why is this the song that we sing right after Rosh Hashanah? This weekend is known as Shabbat Shuva, or the weekend of repentance. It's what lies between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it's a time where we are supposed to continue a process of self-reflection, and again, in the hopes of having some kind of greater experience of what I'm calling divine immanence, as opposed to this distance or turning of God's face away. What in Hebrew is called hester panim, hiding of God's face, from this language of anochi hester astir. Okay, so here's where the Sfat Emet takes us on that. This question again of, in what sense is it a song? In what sense is it a witness? And again, sort of my question of what's it doing here, in particular at this time of year? Why is it being foregrounded? Okay. Bepasuk ve'amta hashira hazot lefanav le'ed ki lotamar, is that? Sorry, I'm just looking at that. Lemantia befizaro. Okay, that was just the quote from the verse above. Diktiv anochi haster astir. Peirashnu sheyeh nistar ha-hester. Vayamru ki ein Elokai b'kirbi. I'm over here. Okay, so he says, first he quotes some of the verses about the last verse about the song. Then he comes back to a few verses back, the language amanochi haster astir, and he says, here it also says in this portion a few verses earlier, yet I will keep my countenance hidden, haster astir, on that day because of all the evil they have done in turning to other gods. I explained that the double language of haster astir, I will keep hidden, means that God's hiddenness will be hidden, and thus the people will say, surely it is because our God is not in our midst that these evils have befallen us. Okay, so this particular reading, I've also seen in the name of other Hasidic thinkers, actually. I won't even say the Baal Shem Tov himself, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'm not sure. But in any case, what he teaches here, or what he brings here, is a statement about the kind of the experience of the reality, if you will. Meaning, why is there double language, haster astir? It doesn't translate so easily, right? In English, it's translated as "I will keep hidden." But you can just hear it, right? Haster astir just sounds like the same word twice. It's like, I will hide. What is the nature of that doubling? And so what he suggests is that the hiddenness itself becomes hidden, by which he means that when God hides God's self, or when God is not an immanent experience, but is actually something profoundly alien or not available. The human experience of that is about divine absence. Let me say that again, right? So if God is being distant or not readily available, visible, or experienceable, right? The human experience often, or the kind of outgrowth of that, is a kind of experiential and intellectual conclusion. So there must be no divinity. There must be no spirituality. There must be nothing in this world if I don't feel it all the time or if I don't know it to be the case. And so he's describing, I think, something that is actually fairly common, like really common, right? The Anoche Haster Astir, the language is from the perspective of God, but the Sfas Emes, in his typical way, right, is actually kind of appropriating it as part human, maybe, as if to say God's hiddenness becomes an experience of human, or an experience of humans' own kind of alienation from God. God hides, and the result is that we no longer even are looking, basically, right? And that kind of reality is here given some language. It's here described, and I don't know about affirmed, right? It sounds punitive. It doesn't sound like it's a good thing, but it is put out there as something that is going to happen, right? It is going to happen that Israelites, people, right, will cease to experience divinity in the world and will say, it must mean that there is no God in our midst, and that's why we experience the world as it is. Now he goes on. He says, Vishamati b'shem harav hakadosh mipeshischa. That is this Rabbi, the holy Rabbi Simcha Bunim of Peshischa. And you see his dates there. He says, I heard in his name, Shezehu nechshav lechet. Ki tzrichin laha'amin ki Hashem yitbarach imanu b'tzara. So he says, I heard from another Rebbe that this itself is a chet. And a chet means a sin, usually, right? And he says, Ki tzrichim laha'amin, because we're supposed to believe that God is with us even in troubles. Okay, so one more time. He says that the verse itself is describing a phenomenon, and the phenomenon is that when God hides, people can't see God. And when people can't see God, people deduce that therefore there is no God. He then makes a judgment about that. And he says, that seems like a really bad thing to think. That's on the baddie side of things, because we should be thinking otherwise. So what I want to suggest to you just right here for a moment, and I do think that this is, I don't know, maybe some of your rabbis talked about this even from the pulpits. People love to talk about this around Rosh Hashanah time, which is that the notion of a chet, which again is often translated into English as sin, is more literally comes from archery language of something missing the mark, right? It's a an arrow that doesn't hit its mark. That's what a chet is. A chet is that deviation from where it wanted to go or it should have gone. And so a chet understood that way, I just want to put out there. I don't know what the intention of the Rabbi Simcha Bunim of Peshischa was, but I think it might be helpful for us to understand at least the possibility that the inability to experience divinity and the kind of natural deduction from that therefore there is none, is not, a black mark on our souls per se, but it is from his perspective, a missing of the mark, a not understanding how spirituality itself works. And that perhaps that the expectation itself of things being totally manifest, that's a misunderstanding of who and what and how divinity actually operates in the world. And so on the one hand, there's a suggestion that that the Torah itself is describing that as, again, something that will be a real phenomenon, a lived experience that people, I'm sure many of us on the call have been in this, through this, are in it right now, right? That what I can't find, I determine just simply isn't there. Right. So on the one hand, it's a description of that. And then there's a kind of editorializing on that. That's, wait a minute. But that actually is not a full picture of how divinity operates in this world in ways that are not manifest and are not visible. And he says, "Ve'al yedei haTorah v'shira hazot yicholim livarer zot ki Hashem yitbarach imanu." And he says, through Torah and this song, these verses, it can become clear that indeed, right, the Holy One is in fact among us. Just want to make sure that I translated it in accordance with the way I translated it before, which is here. Through the Torah here, through the Torah and this song, one can clarify that the Blessed One is with us. And now I'll continue. When the verse states, then this song shall confront them as a witness. This is what it means, that through the Torah, one can clarify all, because the Torah is light. Okay, coming back here for a moment. Okay, so I want to come back to the opening, or one of the opening questions, which was, in what sense is this tale of people going awry and God turning God's face away, in what sense might that be understood to be a song? And what I understand the Sfat Emes to be saying here is that through this song, through this prescription of a reality that we will come to know, we might come to undo it. We might come to become attuned to this as a missing of the mark. Let me say that in a different way, because I think that was a little bit confusing, right? So again, in what sense is this a song, right? A song usually implies kind of celebration, right? He is using it in a way that signals clarification, or yes, something that kind of edifies, something that renders in maybe a different language, that holds reality in front of you so that you can actually see it a little bit differently. Maybe that's one way to understand, let's say, what a poem or a song might do, right? And he's saying that these verses can do that. What these verses do is they call to attention this human experience that will be Leib. I'm going to come back to that too, right? It will be witness, meaning what? This experience, the experience of divine absence, is really one that will itself, right, stand as witness over time. It will be an experience that people have in perpetuity. And his point, though, is that when sometimes, right, when something is prescribed, right, or foretold, maybe, right, when something is foretold, it actually helps us read the experience a little bit differently, right? We're not the first people in the world to ever say, hey, maybe there isn't a God. I've got an 11-year-old son who thinks he's the first atheist that has ever existed in the world because he's just so smart, right? He has figured this out, and the rest of us are just dummies, right? And I sort of have to tell him, you're not the first, and it's okay. This is all part of the package. It's all part of what it means to be human. I'll leave my parenting an atheist on the side for a moment, but just to say, right, there's something I think powerful about a Torah that prescribes, I'm going to say atheism, even though I'm not told, those aren't completely synonymous terms, right? The Torah prescribes it. It describes it. It says, this is what's going to be. And so there's a way in which there's a recognition, right, kind of from the get-go, if you will, right, that we as human beings will lapse in our relationship with God, and God will lapse in God's relationship with us. God will turn God's face from us, and we will turn our face from God, and we will be in this dance like forever. Leib or la'ad is the same letters, by the way, which means forever, right? Leib, vocalized that way, means bear witness. La'ad means forever and ever, right? And so I think both of those meanings are in there, right? This is something that is there from the birth of time, right? I think that there's something about, well, we'll come to Rabbi Nachman in a moment, but like the kind of Kabbalistic idea, right, of the birth of the universe itself happening with a contraction. We've come back to this idea a lot over the course of the year, right? Divine self-contraction, tzimtzum, right? There's a way in which a condition for the existence of the world is God's own contraction from it, right? There's a way in which, right, I'm arguing that kind of myth of creation is one that is itself reckoning with this experience of divine absence, and saying that, yes, not only is it there, it is constitutive of the cosmos itself. Like the world depends on it somehow, some way. And dealing with that and being in conversation with that and maybe singing it from time to time or repeating it the way that a poem has a kind of oral culture that can hopefully be transmitted over time helps to like validate the experience and also might help to undo it a little bit, right? Because one knows that it's there from the start. And our job is to see the phenomenon and to thereby also step away from it somewhat. So let me come back here to the text for a second. He says, "V'zeh shekatuv ve'anta hashira hazot la'ed, she'al yedei haTorah yecholim levarer hakol ki haTorah or." Right. So the Torah is, Torah is everything. Here it is. Darkness. Is that where? No. Here, sorry. When the verse states this, then this song shall confront them as a witness. This is what it means that through the Torah, one can clarify all because the Torah is light. So I said a little bit, maybe jokingly, the Torah is everything. But I think that what's interesting here is that the Torah is light doesn't mean that somehow being in conversation with Torah writ large solves all your problems. And now you're going to be at one with the cosmos and at one with, the source of all. And if you just read this book, all is well. No, but what it's saying is that this book or this particular song, again, will stand the test of time. And it will illuminate your path in the sense that it will actually highlight for you some of what is to come. And it's not all pretty and it's not all nice. And some of it might eat you and consume you. And sometimes you might feel like a victim of it and fall prey to it, right? All of that is actually part of the package. It doesn't deserve a smile. I don't know why I did smile. But in any case, right, there's something very profound about that. I think about it, I'm associating a little bit, so forgive me, but, we will soon be celebrating, after Yom Kippur, there'll be Sukkot. And like Sukkot is all about vulnerability and standing inside of like structures that are going to fall apart. And we read Kohelet, which is all about everything, Hakol Hevel, like it's all going away. It's all ephemeral, vanity, depending upon how you translate the word Hevel, right? But everything comes and everything goes. And Sukkot is also what's supposed to be one of the happiest holidays, right? V'hayita ach sameach. You should be only happy on that day. The Torah says. And so that too is, you might say, is maybe an analog here for what does it mean to sing the song of divine absence? What does it mean to celebrate the joy of vulnerability or ephemerality? I don't know, right? These are seemingly really opposite emotions, experiences, all of that. And yet they're thrown together. And these are just two examples, right? And I think that what's being suggested maybe in both of those places, but I'll stay more local for the moment, but you can think about it in terms of Sukkot if you're so inclined, right? Is that there's something very profound about being in touch with one's own vulnerability. There's something very profound about being in touch with one's own experiences of absence, divine absence, other relationships that have, let's say, disappointed or not shown up, right? And seeing them for what they are, and knowing perhaps that because of this prescription, there might be, and I think this is what the Sfat Emet is trying to get at, right? Out of the recognition of this as a prescribed human reality, might emerge a desire for reconnection. I know this is a little bit confusing, but I think there's a difference between distance and absence. I think that's what I'm going to go with. There's a difference between distance and absence. The claim of Anochi Haster Astir is that what is distance, meaning there's a relationship, but we've turned away from each other. There's a difference between that and we don't have a relationship at all, or there's nobody on the other side. Anochi Haster Astir says your experience of distance will become one of absence. But, says the Sfat Emet, right, and others, right? But if you are aware of that, if you stay aware of the likelihood of that blurring, of that slippage from distance to absence, you might stop it there and actually, right, stop at distance, because distance itself implies relationship. And distance itself means that there's a possibility for closeness. And when you recognize that there's distance and not absence, right, we might become, right, seekers of relationship again, right? And it's all about the consciousness, he says, of that. So just to finish this up, I see I'm talking too long, I'm sorry. He says, no, you know what? I think I'm gonna continue with the other sources. Well, okay, I'll just finish it up. Fine. V'ze'atzmo, I'm forgetting again what that stands for. Ki lo lema'an tihiyeh. It's an unusual use of the lamed tet. Ki lo tihiyeh mipi zar'o zeh ha'edut sh'Hashem yitbarach imanu k'mo shekatuv chazal al mishkan ha'edut edut hi she'ashchina shura b'Yisrael. I know I'm doing this part quickly, but it seems it's just a different literary hook for him to say this same idea. He says, this is the meaning of the Torah will never be lost from the mouth of their offspring. This is a testament, a dut, that the Blessed One is with us. As our sages say about the tabernacle of testimony, which is called Mishkan Ha'edut, right? Edut, he's making a linkage, that it is testimony to all of humanity that the divine presence rests among the Jewish people, right? So for something to be a dut or to act as an aid is for something to actually be a constant reminder of, again, presence over absence. And there are words that do that in the form of a shira, a song or a poem. There are objects that do that in the form of the tabernacle, right? And he's saying that we have these different symbolic ways in our tradition to act as reminders, or to remind ourselves that where we detect absence, we ought to actually sit with distance. And from that place of distance, perhaps seek closeness. Absence is not distance. Distance isn't closeness, but we need to be able to move between them and not confuse one for the other. And though the Torah prescribes Hanochi Haster Astir, this will happen. It will happen on a vast cultural level, and it will happen on a deep internal level, that we will cease to experience divinity and therefore determine that there is, in fact, none. He's saying just stop right there, recognize that though you don't experience, that might be a sign, again, not of abandonment, not of neglect, and not of non-existence of God, but actually of a distance that itself can be rectified. And I wanted to just share with you a few more texts, if I will. This idea of divine distance as a kind of song made me think of a song that really interestingly, the words are the words of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. They are ve'afilu behastara shabatocha hastara bevadai gam sham nimtza Hashem yitbarach. Even in the concealment, within the concealment, surely the Holy One is there too. If I was adept enough in technology and knew how to give you song, like I could play something for you, but I'm not. So you'll have to trust me here that these words have become pretty much a pop song in Israel. There are many different versions of it, but like truly, like there are people bopping to this song, Ve'afilu b'astara. There are slower versions of it that were popularized by Rabbi Yosef, not Rav, just Yosef Karduner, excuse me. He had a slow version, and it's been kind of popified over time, which is itself interesting, kind of culturally. But the words themselves are really quite crucial, right? Even in the concealment within the concealment, Be'afilu behastara shebetocha hastara, right? What is the concealment within the concealment? It's the haster astir. It's the double concealment. It's the, again, what I am describing as the conflation of distance with absence. I hope that that's clarifying and not confusing, but you'll tell me in a moment how I can actually explain that better. Okay, and again, this afilu behastara idea. So I gave you a couple of different figures. I gave you their dates too. You can see they're not in order, but Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who's the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, of Yaakov Yosef of Polnoi, I think we also discussed very recently. He is a student of the Baal Shem Tov. I'm saying this just because I want you to understand that like the lineage, or the like starting from the Baal Shem Tov on in these different ways, whether you're student of or family of, the idea of hastara, of divine hiddenness as kind of a central tenet specifically of the spiritual life, right? That it is part of the spiritual life to experience hastara, to experience divine absence. So, I just said that, divine distance, right? Or divine hiding, right? It's kind of like a core tenet. And I think that that's something, again, like prescribing the problem, like it's so powerfully central that I just want it to not be overlooked. So here's another example from the Toldot Yaakov Yosef. Ve'achar sheyeda adam klal zeh, she'ein shu masach mavdil veino levein elokav, achar sheyeda ha'adam shakadosh baruch hu mistater sham, ein zeh hastara. Kanal. When a person understands this principle, that there is no mask that divides between a person and her God, when a person recognizes the Holy Blessed One is in hiding, hiddenness falls away. I think that this kind of captures much more succinctly than I can what I've been trying to say in his name, which is this idea that when you understand this as a principle, as a klal, he says, achar sheyada adam klal zeh, or you might say shira hazot, when a person can sing the song, when a person knows this poem by heart, when you know that it is the kind of fate of humanity to make this conflation, to make the conflation between distance and absence, having that knowledge itself might stand as a way of drawing a wedge between those two things and pushing us back. Maybe it's an odd thing to kind of wish for an awareness of divine hiddenness as opposed to divine absence. But that is indeed the claim, that divine hiddenness itself is its own kind of, I don't want to say blessing, but is its own kind of opportunity in the ways that it can open a person up to get, let's see if we can kind of ground this in human terms, and then we'll open it up. But maybe some of you can come up with a better analogy than I can, right? But just on a human level, right? Being estranged from somebody what is a better word? But if I'm estranged from a family member, I think we think of that as like, I have no relationship with them, God forbid, right? But if I'm like not talking to my mom today, right, it's because I'm in such a deep relationship with her, right, that we get mad at each other and we can get kind of hot-headed sometimes. And the not talking is itself its own kind of weird, but its own testament to the presentness of the relationship itself. Does that make any sense? I hope so. Right. And that's in contrast to, right, the family member that I thankfully don't have this in my family, but I'm sure many people do, right? The family member you just don't talk to, nobody talks to, like it's as if they are not alive, right? That's total estrangement. But distance, or I'm not talking to you, I'm mad at you. Maybe that's even better, right? Anger itself, right, can be a testament to, an aid, a testament to, right, the heat of the relationship, right, because the relationship itself matters enough. And so, right here on the kind of God plane, right, there's an invitation, right, in the form of a song, right, which is to say something that is memorable, something that sticks with you, something that can accompany you, right, wherever you go. There's an invitation to not let distance, or maybe not let anger become estrangement, but to keep the relationship alive, even if it's one that doesn't always feel so full of light, because the sustaining or the maintaining of the relationship itself can yield rectification. Okay, I see I'm really talking too much. Let me just finish by saying, why do I think that this is here right after Rosh Hashanah? So on the one hand, it does seem like a wild contrast to maybe the high majestic tones of Rosh Hashanah, and also good. So you might say, well, Rosh Hashanah is also about ways in which we've turned away and maybe have felt that God has turned away from us. So in that sense, maybe these themes are very, very much resonant at this time. The idea that we might, and that we have, right, turned away towards other gods, other commitments, other things that have drawn us. Sure, this is a time of year we might want to like recenter ourselves. But I also think that the message of Hester Panim, interestingly, I think really becomes its own kind of, again, maybe even blessing, or to use some terms from last week, a different kind of maybe boundaried relationship. So last week we were talking about ni'ilah and locks and doors, and how sometimes those actually help relationships, and can rein things in and hold stuff. And I also look at this time period, as I said then, right, the time period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right, is its own kind of phenomenon. They have a name, the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance. They're also called Ben Kesed LeAsur, between the covering of the moon, which is Rosh Hashanah, and the 10th of the month, which is Yom Kippur, right? It's its own period, right? And it's its own period that's characterized by a very different energy. And I know that I've said things of this sort during this month of Elul, or during the past month of Elul, that I think that part of what Parshat Vayelech is doing is like kicking us out of the consciousness of Rosh Hashanah, and right before we can get to a place of Yom Kippur, kicking us out of that high consciousness, literally kicking us out of like the synagogues, right? We're not spending all our days there. We're in the world. We're in a world of hiddenness. We're in a world of mess. We're in a world where, right, presence is not at all obvious. And the quest, ve'afilu behastara shebatocha hastara, even in the midst of concealment within concealment, right, in these in-between days, the days of non-glory, the days of that are not full of big communal proclamations of this or that, it's in those quiet times that that we might try out this statement of Bivadai Gam Sham Nimtza Hashem Yitbarach, that these 10 days in between are 10 days of in-betweenness, are days of hastara, of hiddenness, and they're a chance to maybe try out this kind of call to either find holiness, or at least to be able to circumscribe a feeling of distance, to keep it away from absence and back into a sphere of engagement and relationship. Okay, and with that, I am going to stop sharing, and I spoke way more than I usually do, so I'm sorry. But please, I want to hear from you. Anne, go ahead. No, you had it, and then you.
How's that now?
Good.
Okay. I thought of a couple things while you were talking. When you started out, why is this for Shabbat Shuva? Maybe it can serve as a reminder because, well, Kol Nidre is between us and God, but everything else is between us and people. It's up to us during this period to make things right on our own. It's not up to God, it's up to us. So God stays hidden for a little bit to let us do our work.
Nice. That's very interesting. That's very nice. Yeah.
And then when you were talking about the song as a witness and the relationships, it's like when you do feel estranged in a relationship, like any long relationship, but think about a marriage, you've got that ketubah you could look at. It's your witness. Or you've got a counselor. You've got something to remind you. And the other thing I thought was that the whole idea of hiddenness even goes back to Tzimtzum. God has to hide to make space for the world. For sure, right? And that's what we were talking about before, right? That this like founding myth of the kind of kabbalistically inclined creation is precisely that. Yes, it relies on hiddenness and stepping back. All right, thank you, Beth Brown. Go ahead.
Hi. There's a couple of things that came to mind with regard to the hiddenness of God. I started thinking in terms of, you could almost call it a galactic scale analogy. The astronomers tell us that there is a black hole at the center of our galaxy. And there are different ways that they deduce that it's there. And one of the ways they deduce it's there is by the light at the event horizon. It's kind of a halo around it of the objects that haven't been subsumed yet. And in that analogy, if we take God as the black hole, all that mass, all that potentiality, all that energy is still there, but we are unable to see it, and we can only approach it in very indirect ways. And when we get to this actual song or poem in the next parsha, Moshe starts out by saying, "Listen, heavens, and then let the earth hear my words." And so at that point, we're kind of taking it out of that heavenly, abstract, transcendent realm and bringing it our. And the song talks about God's speech coming to us as dew or as rain, and it's so intimate compared to the hiddenness of the hiddenness.
Yeah.
And so I kind of think of this whole discussion as being a contrast between the ideas of God as transcendent and the idea of God as being immanent, right?
Totally. Totally. Thank you. Come back next time to talk about dew and rain and Parshat Ha'azinu. You're absolutely right. And I appreciate you raising that, because I think that part of what I'm highlighting in terms of like liturgy versus this parsha, but I think you're doing an even better job just talking about the parshas themselves. Give us, varieties of metaphors right? Widely differing images of God and of the relationship between God and human beings. And sort of along those lines, in terms of like what I've, talked about before in terms of prescribing the problem, right? We have so many different examples throughout all of Tanakh, not only the 5 books, right? But if you think of Eov in there too, Job, right? So many different ways that human beings have interacted with God, have not interacted with God, have refused to interact with God, have protested God, right? There's this wide variety itself is on display here at the end of Moses's life. It's on display in the rhythms of our calendar. It's on display in the course, again, of our readings, all of which is to say that there's just a lot of different ways of, again, imagining who or what or how God, spirit, divinity is, and also relating to it. And so there's something, I think, beautifully provocative about the ways in which, again, sort of the Jewish rhythms push us to experience things and their opposites very close to each other. So the highs of Rosh Hashanah, the low of Parshat Vayelech, that maybe high of Yom Kippur, vulnerability of Sukkot, but that's also joyful, right? It's all like a big mush that I think kind of pushes us to widen the scope of what we are capable of feeling, what we're willing to experience, all of that. Okay, I'm losing time. Sorry. Thank you. Larry, go ahead.
I think I know what song God wants us to sing, and it's by the Talking Heads. I've been thinking about this question of why we're instructed when we start losing faith, when we stop believing, why does God want us to sing a song? And it seems like there's 2 possibilities. One is songs help us remember stuff. That's why when I can't remember the order of the alphabet, I sing the alphabet song. But the other reason is that it engages a different part of our brain than the rational brain.
Nice.
That songs are emotional and not rational. That's why we enjoy songs that talk about sitting on top of the world, or whether there's 8 days in a week. They don't make sense, but the song still works.
Yeah.
And so when God tells us, when you lose faith, start singing, he's saying,
so
stop making sense.
That is really
what
beautiful.
David Byrne had to say on the subject.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much. And you're making me actually think about Rabbi Nachman, who was quoted earlier, right, for his statement about hiddenness. And he is also very famous for the kind of privileging of wordless song, of nigun. I just lost your face. Oh, there you are. Right. And for precisely the reasons that you just said, right? That for him, nigun, which is, right, wordless song, right? Nine, eyes, right? Wordless songs to him are kind of the language that we might use for that which is essentially ineffable, right? When we are sort of supra-rational, right? Beyond, outside of, right? When we lose our ability to actually speak, what we're left with, right? Perhaps is melody, or maybe is song, is poetry, right? That is so wonderful. Really, thank you. Really, I'm going to take that with me. And Rabbi Nachman agrees with you. Okay, Irving, go ahead. Irving,
thank you. Yeah, as you were talking, it just struck me that I think that the original context of Edut in the Parsha is more negative, that God is saying this song and Ha'azinu is going to testify against you when you rebel against me and so forth. But the Sfat Emet is turning it completely around to a positive, that
that's very well
God
said.
is going to be with you no matter what, even if you sin. So just wanted to make that observation.
Okay, thank you. We can always rely on you for good linguistic observations. Thank you so much. And you're absolutely right. Right, like maybe that does need to be amplified. Right, that in the context, edut, or witnessing, right, can be seen as witnessing, bearing witness against the Jewish people, right? And certainly the Sfat Emet and some of the others take it in this other direction, that they will kind of stand with the Jewish people, in a sense, bearing witness to God, or right, like the not the korban, the Mishkan Ha'idut, excuse me, right, is like God's own witness in flesh. That sounds like not of our tradition, but right, there's something very tangible that will bear witness to God's presence. Okay, thank you. Ilana.
Hi, thank you. So I find myself thinking not only of the reality of the Haster, inside the Haster, the concealment within the concealment. I ask, is this a necessity, like a necessary condition of our world? And that, of course, takes my mind to the original Tzimtzum, God's removing God's self in order to make room for the universe. So it's and just trying to think of a concrete example, not a specific one, but I often find that at the times that I feel maybe God is most distant, meaning times of stress or fright in my own life, and if I can hold on to the sense that God is somewhere inside of that, even though it seems hidden, then when that, luckily, or in many cases, or in whatever way it continues to progress and manifest itself in the trajectory of one's life narrative, when it becomes clear to me where God actually is in that story, then it's not just that I kind of re-establish faith, but the faith that's established is actually much deeper and greater and broader. So that's just one way of thinking of, is this a necessity for the human experience of the Haster? Not just this is the reality, but why is this a necessity? If I want to believe in a God that designs the universe with a purpose and not just randomly, completely. So
there's so much to say on that topic, but I'll say one thing that I'm thinking of when you say what you just did, and that is the character of Esther, Queen Esther, and the Purim story gets read in much the way that, by some, it's much read in the way that you've just described, right? And that, Esther, or the story of Purim, right, which is, according to the Talmud, right, the Talmud asks, Esther min haTorah minayin, where is Esther in the Torah? Which is a silly question because Esther's not in the Torah; she's way after the Torah, right? And the answer is Anochi Haster Astir Panai, right? That Esther is, in a certain sense, found in that doctrine. Right, and what does that actually mean? Understanding of Purim, there's too much to say, right? Is that Purim is a time when the Jewish people said "Kimu v'kiblu," when they willingly took upon themselves the Torah as opposed to having it coerced upon them at Sinai. And in this way, some late Hasidic readers. I'm thinking of someone who would not necessarily consider himself a chassid, but Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner comes to mind, is somebody who loved to read Purim in this way as kind of Kodesh Kedoshim, like one of the holy of holiest days of the year. Why? Because it is exactly what you just described, right? Because it's the time of year that actually affirms the human relationship to divinity, right, on human terms, in the midst of hastara, right, in the midst of hiddenness, inside of a world that is relatable to ours in the ways that it's not explicitly divine. God is not in the Megillah, all of that, right? And so Megillat Esther, kind of for some, becomes really like the pinnacle of a modern spirituality, basically, and of one that has stickiness to it as well. There's a statement, I think the Rambam, that says that when the Messiah comes, right, we're going to stop doing everything except for, I think Pesach might still be in there, and Purim, right? And that's actually where some of this commentary gets going, is like, what does that mean? And just to your point, Ilana, right, the idea that like the thing that's most important, most sticky, most vital, even, in the time of the Messiah, which is let's imagine a time where God is not even hidden, we'll still need to have to make that choice, right? You still have to choose to see what's in front of your eyes. And we never get to escape that. And it is a condition of humanity. And when we elect that, right, that's actually what we can retain, what we can hold on to, and what we might be able to say, like, kimu v'kiblu, we actually like took it upon ourselves and we actually kind of lived out this relationship. Okay, I really talked a lot this time, sorry, but really thank you all so much, especially to those at the end who gave beautiful, beautiful insights about song and stickiness and all that. So really thank you. Please come back next time because I'll miss you if you don't. Okay, bye-bye.